Over more than 1,000 years, the route to Santiago has been trodden by millions of feet. The most important holy route in Christianity attracted millions of Europeans in the Middle Ages, and people from the world over in the late 20th century. Some of the pilgrims who follow the route are motivated by religion, while others set out in search of adventure. At a time when Europe needed to be united, the route to Santiago was the first element that made this possible. Pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago, on their way to visit the sepulchre of the Apostle, will find in hospitable burghers a plethora of Jacobean marks. The Gate of Santa Maria is one of the 12 gates in the medieval city walls. Rebuilt in the 16th century as a triumphal arch, it shows the Emperor Charles V surrounded by the most significant characters of the history of the city and Castile. The Plaza del Rey San Fernando boasts the Cathedral of Santa Maria, which was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984. Built on the location of the original Romanesque cathedral, the first stone was laid in 1221 by King Ferdinand III and Bishop Don Mauricio. The main facade has the Royal Gate, also known as the Gate of Pardon, which was refurbished in the 18th century, and a large rose window and gallery with 8 statues of the monarchs of Castile beneath the statue of St. Mary and the inscription Pulchra es et decora. On both sides are the 84-metre towers, crowned with slender spires from the 15th century. The history of Leon is written on every one of its stones, reminding visitors that it was once part of an old kingdom, and that it played a key role in the route of the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James. The city of Leon is the capital of Leon province, in the autonomous community of Castile and Leon in northwest Spain. The city is home to an enviable collection of monuments that embraces almost all artistic styles, from Romanesque, Gothic, Plateresque, Renaissance and modern. Convento of San Marcos is a convent hospital for pilgrims. It was used as a hospital for the pilgrims on the road to Santiago de Compostela. That's why some of the statues that appear on the Plateresque style facade of the convent of San Marcos and some medallions represent Jacobean motifs. A good number of the other statues exalt Carlos I's universal monarchy. One of Leon's glories is without doubt the cathedral, one of the finest in Europe. Construction started in the 13th century, and it took 200 years to complete. Among its unusual features are its towers and steeples, where no attempt was made to make them match. It has more than 250 remarkable stained glass windows, including a large rose window. In total, there's over 1,800 square meters of glass. The Cathedral Museum is also worthy of a visit, with its wide array of exhibits. The Leon Cathedral, dedicated to Santa Maria de la Regla, was declared of cultural interest in 1844. The pilgrim's route to Santiago, the objective of which was a saint's tomb in Santiago de Compostela, enabled cultural communication between all the towns of the Catholic world. The historic fact from which the town of Santiago was converted into a pilgrimage centre was the discovery of the tomb of St. James and his declaration as a patron saint of the kingdom in the 9th century. Today, the town has been converted into one of the most important monumental sites in the world. Its culture and monuments are of great value, and outstanding among them is the impressive cathedral with a Baroque facade located in the Plaza de Obradoira. The vast area of this square, devoted to the cathedral building, is in fact made up of 3 easily distinguishable parts, namely a central section and 2 side ones. The central section is none other than the main cathedral facade, which bears the same name as the square itself, El Obradoira. Built in Baroque style in the first half of the 18th century, this facade came to replace a formerly existing one and features elements to be assigned to various epochs. Thus, the flight of steps giving access to the cathedral was erected in the 17th century and leads to what is mistakenly referred to as the Old Cathedral, but which in reality is a 12th century vaulted Romanesque style edifice, one which forms the true foundations of the cathedral at this point. Standing around 70 metres tall, the towers feature a 12th century Romanesque style first level, disguised by more recent additions, to which the 2 remaining levels were added in the 17th and 18th centuries, Baroque style. The highlights of the rich ornamentation gracing this facade are, from top to bottom, the effigy of St. James the Apostle, depicted in pilgrim's attire, and underneath the latter, a star-spangled chest symbolising the saint's tomb, on either side of which stand the images of St. James' favourite disciples, Theodore and Athanasius. Moving on from the Plaza del Obradoira, we reach this square by means of a passage, the Arco de Palacio. Plaza de la Azabacheria is so called in memory of the Guild of Jet Craftsmen, or azabacheros, whose workshops once lined both the square itself and the adjoining street of the same name. Plaza de la Azabacheria is flanked by 3 extraordinary buildings: the cathedral, whose northern facade gives onto the square, the Archbishop's Palace, and the monastery of San Martin Pinario. The Azabacheria facade was built in the second half of the 18th century in a style marking the transition from the Baroque to the Neoclassical. The building, known as San Martin Pinario, was a Benedictine monastery from the time of its foundation in the 9th century until the advent of ecclesiastical disentailment in 1836, which forced members of religious orders to abandon their cloisters. At a later date, the edifice was reconverted to house the council seminary of the Santiago de Compostela Archdiocese, a function that it still serves today. Spreading out as it does, over an area of 20,000 square metres, the present-day building was erected in Baroque style from the 17th to the 18th century, thus replacing the former structure that stood on this site. The Plaza de la Quintana Square is reached along a winding lane, Tránsito de la Quintana, which skirts the cathedral from Plaza de la Azabacheria. Plaza de la Quintana is arranged into two levels, connected by an extremely wide flight of steps. The upper section is called Quintana de Vivos, Quintana of the Living, and the lower one, Quintana de Muertos, Quintana of the Dead. The Monasterio de Antealtares. The Monasterio de Antealtares ranks as the second oldest building in Santiago, having been founded immediately after the discovery of the remains of St. James the Apostle, at a time when work was already underway on the basilica that Alfonso II the Chaste had ordered to be built over the saint's tomb. The eastern facade of the cathedral is also known as the Quintana facade. Constructed in Baroque style in the second half of the 17th century, in an attempt to give a more uniform appearance to the east end of the cathedral, which, aesthetically speaking, had suffered as a consequence of the many alterations carried out on this part of the building between the 12th and the 17th century. On contemplating this facade, the attention of the observer is drawn by its two magnificent portals. The one situated nearest the flight of steps leading up from the square is closed off by an iron grille and is adorned by 27 sculptures. This doorway leads through to a small courtyard, at the far side of which stands the world-renowned Puerta Santa, or Holy Door, which is only ever open during the holy years. Plaza de las Platerías, Silversmith Square, is lined on two of its sides by the cathedral, and is flanked on the other two by the Chapter House and the Bank of Spain, the latter dating from the middle of the last century. At the centre of the lower level of the square stands a fountain, Puente de los Caballos. As we enter Santiago Cathedral, we become aware of the original structure of the edifice, the exterior of which has undergone many alterations and has been extensively added to in the course of time. The original cathedral church, built from 1075 to 1188 in pure Romanesque style, has a Latin cross ground plan. Lying at the centre of the top arm of the Latin cross, the high chapel was covered in gilt wood and ornamental stones during the Baroque period, in the second half of the 17th century. The high altar, lined with sheets of engraved silver, is presided over, as is its side grillwork, by a 13th century Gothic polychrome stone sculpture of St. James the Apostle. Covering the whole of the high chapel is a solid, sumptuous gilt wood baldachin or canopy, supported by a series of massive angels. Regarded as a veritable masterpiece of Romanesque sculpture, this doorway, the Portico della Gloria, Doorway of Glory, was built by Master Matteo in the period spanning the years 1166 and 1188. Having been designed to serve as a porticoed entrance to the cathedral, it comprises 3 arches, a central one and 2 side ones, that correspond to the cathedral nave and aisles. Dominating the central arch tympanum is the figure of Christ surrounded by the 4 evangelists, each of whom can be identified by means of their respective symbols, namely the eagle, St. John, the writing desk, St. Matthew, the bull, St. Luke, and the lion, St. Mark. Appearing on either side of the latter is a group of figures in prayer representing the people of God, beneath which there are 8 angels carrying the instruments of the Passion. The tympanum is framed by an archivolt representing the 24 elders, depicted here playing a series of musical instruments. The part of the cathedral lying to the right of the Obradoiro facade belongs to the cloister, itself built in the 16th century in plateresque style and featuring an impressive gallery on its upper level and a strange tower with a tiered roof, reminiscent of a dovecote at the southwestern corner of the building. The old church of San Martino was founded in the 12th century, and the current one dates from the 17th century. The church has an impressive plateresque facade from the late 16th century. The central part, between the door and the oculus, is dominated by the Virgin, St. Benedict and St. Bernhard, while the pediment crowning the front depicts St. Martin sharing his cape with a pauper. The towers only rise to the height of the facade, due to the opposition of the cathedral's chapter, which was afraid that the view of the basilica would be blocked. Occupying 3 floors, the Museo del Pellegrino is a tribute to the Apostle St. James the Greater and the pilgrims who come to visit his relics. This museum highlights the importance of popular devotion to St. James and the development of the pilgrimage routes to his tomb, starting in the High Middle Ages, especially in Europe. It consists of 8 rooms, in which, through images, objects and documents, the origins of the cult of St. James are explained to the visitor, as well as the beginnings and evolution of the pilgrimages, how the different routes in the town of Santiago de Compostela gradually took shape, and the influence of these pilgrimages on the artistic development of this city's craft guilds. The convent of San Francisco de Val de Dios was founded by St. Francis of Assisi during his visit to Santiago de Compostela in 1214 at the place called Val de Dios. The land was purchased from the monks of San Marino for the symbolic annual rent of a basket of trout. The foundation, shrouded in legend, is described by an inscription on the wall of the present-day convent, according to which St. Francis commissioned a coalman called Cotolet to build it. This he was able to do thanks to the miraculous discovery of a treasure. All that remains of the original building are 5 Gothic arches in the cloister and Cotolet's tomb. The present-day Baroque church was built between 1742 and 1749, reflecting great simplicity and formal purity. Later on, a neoclassical alteration modified the facade, which includes an image of St. Francis by the sculptor Ferreiro. Every day of the week there are cultural events and places open to go out in Santiago. It's common to start going out for some tapas at 8 or 9 in the evening. There are plenty of places in the new part of town, but it's the bars and taverns of the old town that are the real specialists. Visit the squares around the cathedral, where you can see improvised performances by artists, musicians, and of course La Tuna, traditional university serenading bands, who can usually be found there. Its old town is hard to beat. The historic centre is set around the cathedral. This part of the city has the UNESCO World Heritage designation. Here you'll find monuments that are real artistic gems of different architectural styles. Buildings with centuries of history that give the city a unique appearance.